While the two words sympathy and empathy are commonly confused in the English language, many people make the mistake of using these nouns interchangeably. And even though they are related, there is a difference between the meaning of sympathy and empathy and how they are being used. And just before we proceed further, I would like to check if what you are showing is empathy or sympathy, and if you cannot give a clear answer to that, make sure you watch this video to the end as I walk you through a milestone in the shoes of others. Ready to walk in it? Let's get it rolling. What empathy and sympathy is. While sympathy is a shared feeling, usually of sorrow, pity, or compassion for another person, for example, when someone loses a loved one, you feel sympathy towards that person and their family. Well, empathy goes beyond that. It goes beyond the mere expression of concern for another person's misfortune. Rather, it is the ability to actually feel what another person is feeling. In other words, walking 1,000 miles in their shoes. For example, someone lacking empathy may not be able to understand why another person is upset over a situation if they cannot imagine themselves in that person's place. Someone has empathy if they can put themselves in the same situation and perceive how the other person is feeling, even if they do not share those feelings. Empathy is stronger than sympathy. It is the ability to put yourself in the place of another and understand someone else's feelings by identifying with them. With empathy, you put yourself in another's shoes, often feeling this more deeply than if you just felt sympathy. For example, when someone loses a loved one, you feel sympathy towards that person and their family. You may share a feeling of sadness with them, but you might not have empathy for their situation if you have not experienced it, or cannot imagine experiencing a death in the family. Empathy versus sympathy. Having known what empathy and sympathy is, it is important we look at the differences between these two concepts to avoid ambiguity. And sometimes it is when someone expresses their feelings of downside that looks like a high mountain that is essential to master the art of empathy versus sympathy. Luckily, there are some signs to know when you're responding with sympathy instead of empathy. And here are some of them. A feeling versus shared response. Even though they may sound alike, empathy and sympathy are not mutually exclusive, nor are they always felt in tandem. Here is what I mean. A family that loses a loved one will most likely receive sympathy from many, but only a few who have experienced a similar loss are able to empathize truly. Think about it this way too. Someone who files for bankruptcy, most people who care about that person would only feel sympathetic to their situation and maybe have some pity for them. A feeling sometimes closely related to sympathy, but relatively few would be capable of empathizing, as only a minority of people ever go through the experience of filing for bankruptcy themselves. The head and the heart. One way to differentiate whether what you are having is sympathy or empathy is to remember that sympathy is a mere feeling you share with others, while empathy is the ability to understand the emotions of another person. While sympathy is simply an emotional feeling, empathy is having a clear understanding of the other person's feelings because you were once there. People who lack this capacity are often classified as narcissistic, sociopathic, or in extreme cases, psychopathic. However, these terms are only applicable if a person consistently lacks the capacity to sympathize or empathize with others. In general, there are many cases where people may not feel sympathetic or empathetic due to lack of knowledge or because their experiences are different. This does not imply abnormal behavior. On the other hand, some people are overly empathetic and can eventually be overwhelmed by the negative feelings they take on from their relationships and encounters with other people. Validating versus reassuring. When you meet a woman who had worked for her entire life only to retire at her late 60s with a broken hip, she is most likely affected by the fear of falling again. Now, if she comments, "I'm really afraid of falling again," and one of the most common responses would be, "But you are being so careful." Even though that is meant to be comforting, it really just invalidates her feeling of fear, but rather insinuates that the original accident happened because of her carelessness. A more empathetic response would have been to simply nod and paraphrase back the feelings you heard by saying, "It sounds like you are afraid of falling again. I don't know what to say, but I'm here for you." So when next time someone expresses their feelings and all you just want to do is to jump into action to solve the problem, wait a bit, listen more and affirm that those feelings are real. Accept it as it is. Only after all that you may ask, "You want any ideas, or what do you want to do about it?" Remember, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is a connection. So stay connected.